Klyptonians, coming to you from the Tree of Whispers tomorrow, the 5th of March, 8 a.m. Hawaiian Standard Time, the best time, by the way. The Gauntlet is releasing. I'm very excited to get in there, strategize. Hopefully you guys all join me there to let me know what you guys are experiencing, because it's going to be pure strategy. We don't have to worry about who has the best gear, who has the best damage. Today I got a video for you with some gameplay from the Gauntlet itself, from the live stream, so we'll show you that. Then we're going to do a run with this build. I think this is probably going to be the best build to bring in there, and then we'll break it all down. So check it out. All right, so here's a little bit of gameplay. When you start off in the Gauntlet, we're going to start with Tomb Lord, but looks like they're going to be skipping everything. Then we're going to be running around. Your goal is obviously to kill everything. So this person's playing with a ball sork. So if you see on the mini map there's little icons for shrines and buffs, chests. This one's a key. So that's going to unlock more things. So you're going to get points for killing monsters, for opening chests, killing bosses. This is a non-linear dungeon, so it's going to be up to you to pick the direction that you want to go. But here, if you watch, when we kill this boss, it's going to drop a shrine. There's a way to reset all of the monsters in the dungeon, including this boss. So when you kill that boss, you pick up the shrine, and then that gives you access to it. Once you reset, you can actually go back right here. So he's going to kill this with the shrine. And then you just continue to kill monsters. So it's all going to be about strategy for which way you go, which direction you kill, what bosses you kill when. So this is going to be all speculative. We're going to get in there and we're all going to learn together on how this is going to work. Great, here's the run. We're hanging out with the Rock Dwayne. We're running our charge build here, focused around bleed. It's going to be a pretty popular build from what I can tell, but I think that I have a kind of a unique approach on it here. I actually have a lot focused around Whirlwind, just to get a little bit of extra bleed damage out there so that our cooldowns reset even faster. So the Gauntlet launches tomorrow. This is the build that I'm going to be bringing into it. And as long as you hit at least 3 targets with your charge, your cooldowns are going to get reset. So you won't have to worry about not having charge up. So because we're going to be running the Gauntlet in the way that it's set up, we may have to kite monsters anyway. So we may end up just having to kite a whole bunch of monsters to a shrine, which will be perfect for charge, because then you grab a whole bunch of monsters and you pull them in. And then you charge. And as you can see, everything just dies so quickly. It's going to be tier 70 dungeon equivalent. So we're running a 73 here, so it's a little bit stronger in this dungeon that we're in. But as you can see, like, it's just going to be wrecking everything in its path. Speed is going to be something that we're going to be focused on. We're running a martial glyph to help reduce the cooldowns. And we're just going to cruise through this vault. I'm pretty excited. Top 1,000 players make it onto the leaderboard. So you're telling me I have a chance? We're going to give it a shot. But we're not hopeful. We're going to have fun with it. And going to give it our best shot. I'll be live streaming everything so that we can kind of all come together and figure out what we're going to do. I do have the build spec into HotA because I do want to be able to kill bosses, because that's going to be a big part of it. All of your shrines are going to come from your bosses, so you're still going to need to be able to do some damage for bosses here. So we didn't take all of our points out of HotA. I just want to be able to get through it as fast as possible. So if I'm only using Whirlwind and Charge, Boss fights don't go super quick. So as you're going through, you always want to line up your charges. So get the monsters in front of you, a nice big group. And then you can charge, and then hold that whirlwind button. Because whirlwind, with the bleed damage that we're going to add in with this build, whirlwind itself is still going to do a ton of damage. So you're actually going to be able to just leave things, and they're going to die, just like that elite did. On its own, without me even having to hit it. So that's the run, right there. I'm going to go over the gear that I'm going to be running with. Now, I know this gear isn't something that everybody's going to have access to, but it is something that I'm going to put a build together for without gear like this. So we're running Harlequin's Crest, Juggernaut. I'm running elements on my gloves with Whirlwind Franks. This could change here, but for now, we're going to be running that. To Bolt's Will, Ghost Walkers, running Limitless Rage, Magnum Opus, Ancestral Charge, Grandfather, Ravenous, Red Fuhrer, and Banished Lords. These two here are subject to change. I do have backups in my bag. If I want to go with a movement speed amulet, I can do that. But I'm going to mess around with these two tomorrow when it actually goes live. But that's the run. See you guys back in the training grounds. Let's look at our skill points. The dungeon is level 7. So with the gear that I'm using right now, I'm actually going to be running completely offensive. No defensive skills at all. So to start, we went into just Lunging Strike just to move on. I'm only going to put 1 point into Whirlwind, even though I do rely on the damage because it's going to be enough. Enhanced Whirlwind, and then Furious Whirlwind. So this way, we're adding additional bleed. I'm relying very, very heavily on this build on bleed. So this way, if we don't quite kill something, but we hit it, that damage still gets converted into bleed damage, and they're going to die after we run past. I did go 5 points into HotA because I do want HotA for that extra damage when we're doing bosses. Because I do want the bosses to die quick, we get the shrines faster. So then we go 3 points into Furious Hammer of the Ancients. Moving down here, we took Rallying Cry, Enhanced Rallying Cry, and then Tactical. We don't really necessarily need this. Charge is going to give us back a ton of resources. However, it is always nice to have that little generator in case something does happen. So I'm going to keep that point there because I've maxed out quite a lot of other points. If you do want to get rid of this, you can go into something like Imposing Presence, but I really don't think that it's going to be super necessary in the 70 dungeon. Moving on down. 1 point in a Warcry, Enhanced Warcry, Power Warcry. So we're going to be grouping up monsters. This is going to rely heavily on us getting a big clump of monsters, getting shrines to help increase our points gained. So if we're going to do additional damage with 6 or more enemies around, we're going to be running Power Warcry. Movement speed is going to be life. So we went 3 points into Swiftness. Charge is maxed out all the way down into Power Charge. When we hit 3 targets or more, like I talked about in this run, your cooldown is going to be reduced by 9 seconds. The more points we have in Charge, the less the cooldown is. So if you look right now, we have 10.37 seconds in cooldown. That goes down to 1.37 seconds. And then when Evernight procs, that we get 4 additional charges. So our cooldown is reduced even further. So it's almost 0 cooldown on Charge. We went into Aggressive Resistance, just 1 point just to get through. I went 3 points into Brawling so that Berserking is up for 3 seconds every time I charge. We're going to be charging constantly, but I wanted to get the maximum amount of duration we possibly could on Berserking. Prolific Fury. So more generation of Fury, but again, this is definitely not necessary because we're going to get so much. So if you really wanted to do that, you can just run 3 points back up to here. Completely up to you, up to preference. But I'm going to keep this into my Fury generation so that when I am Whirlwinding, that I get that extra generation there. Moving down, went 3 points into Pit Fighter. A little bit of extra damage. Then we get some damage reduction, but again, 70 dungeons, so I think we'll be okay. 1 point of thick skin, and then whenever we're fortified, we're dealing 12% increased damage. Moving down, we're going to running Wallop, 3 points in. For any time that we do end up having to use HotA for bosses, we want to get that little extra increase in damage, and then a little bit of extra overpower damage for that HotA. 3 points into increased maximum fury through tempered fury, because our magnum opus is going to do extra damage based on the amount of fury that we have. Then each time we swap, we're going to be gaining gaining fury also. So this is really just set up for when we do have to swap weapons around bosses. If you wanted to take these 3 points and put them somewhere else, you could. If you wanted to go into invigorating fury for a little extra life regen, you could too. We went to Wrath of the Berserker all the way down through Supreme. This is where it gets interesting. Your Unbridled Rage is going to increase the amount of damage that your HotA and your Whirlwind does. So with Whirlwind, the more damage that you do, the more bleed you get. So it's going to be super beneficial to the Whirlwind damage. But if we took this out and we put this into Unconstrained, with Unconstrained, this is going to affect our charge damage, because we're going to be berserking. Instead of getting a 25% increased damage, we're going to get a 100% increased damage. So this might be an option that we're going to switch back and forth to between Unbridled Rage and Unconstrained, but we're going to find out as soon as it drops. Let's deep dive into the Paragon board. I really like the way that this board is set up. I took my Charge Barb, and then I reworked that board a little bit to accommodate for more bleed, because we're going to rely really heavily on the bleed damage that we're going to be doing, and took into consideration Whirlwind here. So because we're going to be using Charge all the time, and Charge is a brawling skill, we went with Brawl. Pretty straightforward. Increased damage 18% X. Great. On your next board here, this is going to be Bonebreaker. We went with Wrath here. So this one could be swapped out if you need a little bit more damage with damage reduction with Territorial, but I wanted to run the extra damage. Your second board here is Carnage board. Now, because we're not really running a weapon swap build, we're mostly running Brawl, I didn't go into the Legendary node. The attack speed would help between the swaps, between HotA and Whirlwind, but because we're mostly going to be relying on the charge and the bleed damage, I didn't take this Legendary node. Here, we went Martial. So the big part about Martial is that we get, after casting a shout, your active cooldowns of any non-shout skill are reduced by 4 seconds. So if you miss a charge, and you don't have the cooldown on charge up anymore, you can use this to mitigate some of that cooldown, because 4 seconds is a lot, and we're running 2 charges, so that's 8 seconds right there. That's almost an entire charge cooldown. So even if you miss, you have this as a backup. You're adding extra damage while berserking with this, which is great. Any damage while berserking you can get added on. So your next board coming up here, we're running Weapon Master. So this is specifically set up just for bossing, because if we get to that boss, and if you're running on a controller, hitting charge, you have to make sure that when you get to the very end of your charge, then you swing, that's when you hit the boss. So you have to have your distance down, so it's a little tough. So if we're running a weapon swap build with Whirlwind and HotA, then you can use this to maintain enough fury to swap and let HotA kill the bosses. In this board, we're running Ambidextrous. Since we're going to be running the Magnum Opus and we want to be doing more damage, we're going to be running this glyph here so that we're getting 8x increased damage while we are wielding one-handed weapons. And then we just gain a couple extra buffs from that glyph. So this board over here is Blood Rage. This is the end-all be-all of all barbarians. They do not run a board without Blood Rage or this legendary node. This is a straight damage modifier. It takes all of the damage while berserking bonus that you have. 25% of that goes to a damage modifier. So I have 68% X. That can go up depending on the items that you're running. It can go up to over 100% if you need to, but this is what we're going to be running right now. In this board, we are running Ire. So just going to increase your damage while berserking bonus by 68% for mine. I'm only missing 1 point of strength, so iron. I didn't feel like taking those 2 points there just to get increase your damage while berserking bonus by 68%. You also gain 10% damage reduction your damage when you're running this. This board will connect all the way down here. You can run this board last if you need to get your Bone Breaker for just a little extra overpower. Charge can overpower. Whirlwind cannot, but Charge can, and when Charge overpowers, it hits really hard. So this is really great to have guaranteed overpowers here. And then coming over here, we are looking at the Decimator board. In your Decimator board, we're running Disemboweled. So the 77.6% physical damage over time is your bleed. So bleed is a physical damage. But the big part about this, and this is why we're running so much bleed and why this is so important, killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your non-ultimate active cooldowns. That means your shouts, their non-ultimate, and charge. So that 1 second of charge, 1.37 seconds of charge that I have, we kill an enemy that we've charged into and are automatically bleeding. It gives us that cooldown and charges back up right again. We're going to break down the build. We're going to start with charge. This is going to be your focal point for this. Looking at charge and starting at the top, become unstoppable. So what unstoppable means is that anything that CCs you, which means crowd control, that is stunning, slowing, freezing, anything that takes your character and impairs it from moving or attacking is CC. With charge, every time you use it, you can break that CC, and now you become free of it, and you can continue attacking or continue moving. So with charge having 0 cooldown, that means that you will never be CC'd because you can always charge. Unstoppable also works with your Tobolt spell. So you deal 40% X increased damage while unstoppable. So you're going to be dealing 40% damage because we're always going to be using charge. And then a really big part of this is that when you become unstoppable, every 0 to 1 seconds, you gain 50 primary resource. So your fury is always going to be full as long as you're charging back and forth and keeping your cooldown reduction down. Going back through, enemies that are knocked back into terrain by charge take an additional 150% damage and are stunned for 3 seconds. So if you have enemies here and you charge into this wall, they are going to take that extra damage and then they're stunned. When they're stunned, if you go into your skill tree, we took Wallop. This gives you an extra increased 50% X damage when enemies are stunned. So even if they aren't vulnerable yet because you haven't hit them yet and they haven't become vulnerable, you still get that extra 15% increased damage because of Wallop and because they're charged. So you're going to use charge into a wall. Going down, reduce charge's cooldown by 3 seconds for each enemy hit, up to 9 seconds. Charging a boss reduces the cooldown by 6 seconds. So on normal monsters, if we hit 3 or more, our cooldown gets reduced by 9 seconds, which is almost the entire duration of what charge is. On a boss fight, we're only going to get 6 seconds back, but we have a way to do that, and I'm going to show you what it is. If we're standing out in the middle of the open, and we charge, we're going to know that charge is going to have a 10.37 second cooldown. But we can reduce that by using our shouts here, because we are running the Martial glyph. So if we look at Martial here, after casting a shout, skill and active cooldowns of your non-shout skills are reduced by 4 seconds. So we're going to charge, and then we're going to shout, and then we're going to shout, and look at that, charge is back up. So when we're doing a boss, if we need to charge, and then we hit the boss, or we charge right through it, we can always use this again if we need to get back our resources again from Tobolt's Will. So your shouts are going to play a big part. When we're actually hitting enemies and we charge, we're going to charge, and our cooldown comes right back up because we're hitting enough enemies here. So cooldown is right back up every single time that we charge as long as we hit enough enemies. So as you're using charge, be strategic about it. Make sure that you're paying attention to the cooldown, what you hit, where you hit it. Kite enemies into a big group and swoop through when you're using charge. When we went over the paragon board here, we talked about disemboweled. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to reduce the non-ultimate active cooldowns by 1 second. We're going to be killing a lot of enemies. We're going to do a lot of bleed damage, and we're going to cover bleed right now. Your non-ultimate active cooldowns will always be Rallying Cry, Charge, and War Cry. This will cool your shouts down, so that's actually really, really important because shouts have traditionally a very long cooldown, and you may need them if we miss a charge. So how do we get bleed? Well, we know that we took the skill point here in Whirlwind, where we get bleeding damage here. So every time that we Whirlwind, we're going to do some bleed damage. So as you can see, we're doing 15,000 bleed damage, and the more damage that we do with Whirlwind, the higher that bleed tick goes. We saw some 50s in there, some 23s. That's not going to be our only source of bleed, though. And we're actually going to get a much bigger source of bleed from Charge. But Charge doesn't traditionally have a bleed, so how does that work? We're running Ring of Rabbits. Damaging an enemy with your brawling skills applies 2 stacks of Ren's bleed. You don't have to have Ren in your skill tree. You don't have to have Ren on your board at all. It just automatically applies them. This can only happen once every 4 seconds, and we're going to be charging around all over the place, so you still need to rely on the bleed from Whirlwind. But this bleed tick here is much higher than your Whirlwind will be. So we charge in and we hit an enemy. You see that 48,000 here? If we charge again, we're looking at 84,000. It's way, way higher than the Whirlwind. We're seeing 100,000 crits from, and as we stack it up, I saw 130,000 damage, and we have no buffs up. We're not running Warcry, we're not running Wrath of the Berserker, and those are the kind of numbers that we're seeing. When you're looking at a level 70 dungeon, those monsters don't have a lot of hit points, so that bleed damage is going to add up really quick. We're going to do a lot of damage, we're going to kill monsters really quick, and our cooldowns of everything else are going to go way down because of the disemboweled glyph. We also talked about weapon swap. On the Paragon board, we did end up taking Weapon Master. First swapping grants 4% of your maximum fury. Why did we do that? We did that for bossing. So if you look here, and we Whirlwind and HotA, we want to be able to maintain fury, especially if we're running Unbridled Rage, because we want to be able to get overpowers, and we want HotA to be able to do damage here. So this is why we're still running Banished Lords and why we're still running Red Fury, so we can guarantee some crits and guarantee some overpowers. To cover the aspects, we're going to go over the gear that I have on with different options if you don't have any of the Uber uniques, and options depending on how the Gauntlet plays out. We may not need a couple of the pieces of gear that we're running. So starting at the top, we have Harlequin's Crest. Still running Juggernaut. Now, we're only going to be at 70 dungeons, so this may not be necessary, but we're going to still run it to start off with. If you're running something like armor percent on your gear, you may not need that, so you could probably replace that. It could even go with an offensive stat here. On my gloves, I'm running Elements, and I'm running Lucky Hit with Whirlwind. Now, this could always change to your Hammer of the Ancients if you wanted to, so I have my gloves here if I need them. I don't necessarily need the attack speed unless I'm going to be running weapon swapping. So if you wanted to run something else here, like the Lucky Hit chance, you could do something like that too. You could run all stats too, Strength, all stats, Critical Strike, Hammer of the Ancients. But we're going to be using Whirlwind a lot more, so I went with stacks. To bolts, pretty standard. I don't think we're going to need any damage reduction, so any build should be able to run to bolts pretty successfully. I'm running Unstoppable here movement speed through Unstoppable with Ghost Walkers. My affixes are probably going to change here. I don't know for sure since it's not out yet, but speculation is that Shrine buff duration is going to affect your shrines in this gauntlet. So I'm probably going to end up finding some boots with Shrine buff duration and something where my attacks reduce evade and not maximum cooldown, which I do have something like that here with damage reduction while injured. So there's a couple different options that you can run for boots, but Shrine buff duration may end up being meta. We still don't know yet. I'm running Limitless Rage on my two-hander. The Magnum Opus here, just for the extra damage while we're doing Whirlwind. Extra damage means extra bleed, so I'm also have the option, if I can find a better one in the next day or so, to get more Max Fury, which means more damage to both your HotA and your Whirlwind. Running Ancestral Charge. This is very necessary. This is what adds that whole line of Ancients to your bar that you see right here. Without that, you only hit what's in front of you here, not this whole entire area here. So you definitely want to make sure that you have Ancestral Charge somewhere on your bar. I'm running the Grandfather here. Ring of Ravenous, which we talked about, where you're going to get your extra bleed damage from. I do have Ring of Red Fury on just to make sure that when I get to a boss, HotA does do some damage and does affect it, but this can be swapped out for a couple different options. I do have an option for Dire Whirlwind. I also have the option for the Bear Clan Berserking Ring. So this is something that will help cool down your charge. If you don't have enough cooldown reduction because you're missing a couple pieces, you can run this aspect. It's a really, really good option for you. The Banished Lord's Talisman. This is only going to give you overpowered damage to your charge and to your HotA. Definitely will help for bosses, but I don't know how necessary this is going to be. So I do have another option here, which I do want to go all offensive stats instead of the defensive stats that I have here. But this is going to add ranks to brawling, and you could do something like counteroffensive if you wanted. Additional movement speed. And then I added Berserk Gripping onto this for additional base damage for bleeding. So whenever you're berserking, 45% of that base damage is dealt as bleeding also. So adding more bleed all over the place is what we're trying to go for here. So those are the aspects that I'm running. If you do want to swap out your Uber Uniques for my helmet here, Relentless Berserker, this is just going to increase berserking even further. It's going to add additional cooldown reduction, so that's very, very necessary. You can get more Max Fury. Damage while berserking, so you're going to actually hit harder. And then you run I actually put Veterans Brawler on my two-hand in place of the Grandfather, so this is going to just increase that damage by charge every time that you use Whirlwind, up to 80% extra damage. Now, if you looked at the tooltip from Charge, this already hits really, really hard, and it already does an additional 500% damage right there. So you add 80x to that. It's great. So that is another option if you're not running Uber Uniques. And those are the aspects that we're running for this build. Last but not least, and of course always, the Seneschal. Looking at the governing stones here, we're running Tempest and Flash of Adrenaline. For your tuning stones, Evernight, Fortify support since we're not running Warbringer on our Paragon board, Breaking support, so this is what is going to deal our vulnerable damage to everybody, Duration support, Genesis, and Tactical support. When you're running Flash of Adrenaline, if you take Tactical support, it reduces the cooldown by 40%, which brings the cooldown down to 12 seconds. And we're running Duration support, which increases the duration of this by 4 seconds, which brings it up to 12 seconds, which means that there is no downtime for Flash of Adrenaline. If you don't have Genesis, you can take Genesis and you can swap that out for Safeguard, which is your best option. Just adds some additional 15% damage reduction. You can never go wrong with damage reduction. And if you don't have Evernight, you can take Evernight off and you can do something like Resource support. Just keeps your Fury up. If you wanted to go something more offensive, you could always go with something like Bleeding support to add even more bleed. I mean, why not? Throw it all out there. So those are your options if you don't have both of the unique stones here. That's the build, everybody. Very excited to get into the Gauntlet, start hitting some things. Let me know in the comments what you think if you get to try this build out. I'm going to be live streaming the events every time I get in there, so stop by, strategize with me, see where my build's going, see what I'm changing, how I'm going to be attacking the Gauntlet. It's going to be a game of strategy, so I'm super excited to get in there. See you there. Hey everyone, if you are enjoying the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that button. I am live on Twitch just about every day. Hope I see you there.